My name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I want to welcome you all to our program this evening. I'm pleased to tell you we are going to be talking with Glen Ford, who is the executive editor of the Black Agenda Report. He's going to be coming to Atlanta this week, and on Thursday, October the 13th, the First Iconian Baptist Church, which is 542 Moreland Avenue Southeast, Atlanta 30316. We will be repeating that during the show. And he's going to be talking about war. He's being brought in by the Georgia Peace and Justice Coalition, and we're going to talk with him a little bit about that and other issues as well. So before I talk with Glen, though, I want to read a little bit about him. Glen Ford launched the Black Agenda Report in October of 2006. He is the founding member of the Washington chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. He is an executive board member of the National Alliance of the Third World Journalists, the national political columnist for Encore American and Worldwide News magazine. He's founder of the Black Commentator and the Africana Policies magazines, and media specialist for National Minority Purchasing Council. He's spoken at scores of colleges and universities. He's coming here, as I said, to talk with us as well. So welcome, Glen.
Glad to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, it's just a pleasure to have you on our show. So, and I want everyone to know that we also have here in the studio Cliff Albright, who's joining us in this discussion as well, and we'll be asking questions. So now you're coming to talk about war, right?
Oh, everyone should be talking about war. When we speak of war in the 21st century, just like in the last half of the 20th century, we're talking about the survival of the species.
Well, I tell you what, I'm going to shift the dialogue here for just a hot minute before we talk about war. I want to talk about another war, and that happened to be the debate last night. Can we talk a little bit about that, your impressions about what happened last night, Glen?
Yes, you may.
Right. So I know Cliff wants to join in that discussion, too. We were just listening to this on Democracy Now! They were playing excerpts from the debate, and they had Jill Stein on there. But so what were your impressions about what happened last night? I mean, there was a lot of discussion about war in that debate as well, right?
Well, there was a lot of discussion about war, but I didn't see anybody who was anti-war. Donald Trump has deteriorated in personality and politics so badly, coming from a low place from the very beginning, that even when he tries to put forward a position that is anti-regime change, which he used to talk about 6 months or so ago, he finds it impossible to articulate. And so we're then left with no real anti-war position coming out of that debate. We're left with, we died Hillary Clinton, who we know supports a no-fly policy, no-fly zone policy for Syria, just like she supported in Libya, which in Syria would result immediately in a crisis situation for all life on Earth. Because most folks don't understand this, but former Defense Secretary Gates did explain it back during the Libya operation, that according to U.S. military doctrine, when the U.S. declares a no-fly zone, the first order of business is to destroy the air capability, that is all the aircraft and airport facilities of the targeted countries, and to destroy all of their anti-aircraft units. Well, when you're talking about Syria, you're talking about literally thousands of Russian anti-aircraft units and airplanes. So the declaration of a no-fly zone in Syria by the United States, if it goes by standard U.S. military doctrine, would immediately result in a state of war with Russia. And this could happen at any time. It certainly would be likely to happen with Hillary Clinton as president.
So you were not overly impressed with the presentations. You had something you wanted to say, Cliff? You're chomping at the bit here.
Well, yeah, before I ask the question about some of the things that we did not hear in the debate, just to follow up on that line of thought that you were just talking about, I read your recent article talking about the Syria situation and talking about kind of this war that's going on within the administration, the one side that wants to bomb the jihadists, get rid of jihadists, and then the other side that wants to kind of support the jihadists. Can you talk for a minute about that? We don't want to give away, your whole presentation that you're going to be doing when you get here. But can you just speak to that just a little bit?
Exactly. I want to just mention before you respond to that, Glenn, we're going to talk about some other issues here because you are coming to Atlanta to talk about this. We don't want to, as Cliff was saying, say everything that you're going to be talking about here. Although, go ahead, please respond to his question.
Well, I don't think there is a split in the administration. There is a split in the Pentagon. There is a split in U.S. intelligence circles. All that is absolutely clear. You don't have to read tea leaves to see it. It's right out there in your face. There's a split in the State Department among the career ranks. Even it's up and down the line, and it comes at a time when there is a crisis in the duopoly electoral apparatus, so that we now see a huge portion of what the establishment that we identified previously as Republicans, and I'm talking also about so-called national security establishment that was identified with the Republican Party, they're now in Hillary's big tent, which is bursting at the seams, in fact, with Republicans and stuff. But in terms of U.S. Syria policy, there is no faction. The split is not between those who want to bomb the jihadists and those who don't. The split is between those who want to bomb ISIS and no others, and those who would actually bomb Syrian targets, that is, Syrian government targets, and facilitate a rapid conquest of Syria by various jihadists. The U.S. is now in the position, has been in the position for some time now, of literally protecting not ISIS, which has gone rogue and doesn't take orders from the United States anymore, but protecting Al-Qaeda's outfit, which was called Al-Nusra, and now they have another name, but they're the same people. That is the main force in Aleppo, has been the main force in Aleppo for years. It has its own area of the country in which it dominates. That's Idlib province, which is to the east and to the south of Aleppo. That is Al-Qaeda land. And the all of these smaller jihadist outfits, and that includes the Free Syrian Army, so-called, and nobody can tell you what comprises the Free Syrian Army. They haven't been able to explain that for the last 5 years. But this includes the Free Syrian Army and various other little outfits. They're really all subordinate on the battlefield to the military strength of al-Nusra, which has the support in billions and billions of dollars from Qatar and from Saudi Arabia, even though those two monarchies feud among themselves. Al-Qaeda is their favorite enterprise, and that's why it's so strong. And the United States, finally at this late stage, as they played the negotiation game, they're not even playing the game anymore, said that it couldn't figure out how to separate the moderate rebels, and they've never been able to tell us who those moderates were. They're unable to separate the moderate rebels because they are layered in with Al-Qaeda. That's another way of saying they really are subordinate military units whose usefulness to Al-Qaeda is that these other jihadists can get advanced U.S. weaponry like tow missiles and possibly man-pads and other very sophisticated battlefield devices. The United States and directly and through its proxies gives them those kinds of weapons. But it would be quite embarrassing for al-Nusra fighters to turn up with brand new tow missiles within its ranks. So these smaller jihadist outfits on the battlefield, their value is that they carry sophisticated U.S. weaponry, while al-Nusra is the main terrorist infantry, and carries the bulk of the weight of the fight.
So
Essentially, the United States has been protecting al-Nusra. The split comes within the administration on the question of shall the United States use its overwhelming military and economic force to allow al-Nusra to actually overwhelm the Syrian government and set up its own government, which would be another kind of caliphate. And I think that President Obama, since 2013, has been on the side of the split that would prefer that the war just go on and on and on and on and drain the resources and wear down Syria and its allies in Iran and Hezbollah and, of course, the Russians and do damage that way rather than allow a situation or create a situation in which al-Nusra, al-Qaeda actually marches into Damascus.
I need to say, Glenn, that I don't think we've ever had so much detail about what's happening over there. But I tell you what, we need to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment, okay? Stay tuned. Glenn, I have a question about Gaddafi. Why did the administration want to go after Gaddafi? For what reason, for Pete's sake?
It seems that the French most badly wanted to get Gaddafi because his government, with its tons and tons of billions of dollars worth of gold reserves, was totally committed to a revamping of the situation in Africa, and was basically fronting the money to set up an African development bank in which the currency issued by that bank, that is when the bank makes loans, you're actually issuing currency, would be backed by the gold reserves of Libya, which could be reliably replenished because Libya has a steady supply of oil. And it had already begun creating an infrastructure for that bank. This would have wreaked havoc with France, because although France supposedly is a former colonial power, it ain't. It's a current colonial power. And most of the Francophone countries, the French-speaking countries of Africa, their currencies are tied directly to Paris. We're not talking about just being convertible into European money. We mean that all the balancing of the books is done in Paris, and that's how they
that's interesting.
Control of what's left of their African empire. And this and most of these former French colonies are also heavily or majority Muslim,
right?
And to be in the northern tier of Africa, closer to that culturally as well as geographically to Libya. They already had some influence. So France's remaining African empire was in immediate danger from Gaddafi's plans to create an African development bank.
Well, let me just ask you this question, because it seems to me that Gaddafi, out of all of these countries and leaders in the Middle East, he was the only one who was having significant outreach to the African continent. Is that not right?
Well, certainly. And if you've been to Libya in the several years before the American and NATO attack,
Did you go?
About 2 years before.
Okay.
2009.
Okay.
And everything, Tripoli looked like a city that was being rebuilt, only unfinished. And there were multinational corporations all over the place, from Korea, from India, and of course from Europe, and some from the United States, or at least who have operations here.
Why is that? Why?
Building all over because he was about to create a new way of dealing with the rest of Africa. It wasn't all about just getting access to that one big oil commodity of Libya's, but that Libya was going to be a hub for development throughout the region.
Did the United States not want that?
Well, when you say the United States, you know, it's a big country.
It's true.
It's got a big ruling class, and they argue with each other, and their interests were not as directly threatened as France's interests were.
Right.
And that's why you saw France taking the lead. They were the instigator from the very beginning. My opinion is that the United States went along with, and of course, if the United States gets involved, it becomes the leader because it has, especially of air attacks, because it's the only country that can refuel aircraft for long-range bombing. That NATO depends totally on them. But the United States went along with this not because of the development plans, not as an immediate cause of the development plans that were ongoing in Libya, but because the Saudis and the other kleptocratic monarchs in the Persian Gulf got they felt an existential threat when the Tunisian dictator was overthrown, but especially when Mubarak was overthrown in Egypt, because these countries do not have competent armies of their own. The Saudis, their armies are mercenary, and about a quarter of their army is made up of people from Yemen. You know, the United Arab Emirates, and those are mercenary armies. And Qatar is just a country of 600,000 people who don't work because they get all that oil income, and folks from South Asia come in and do all the work, and no Qatari is going to serve in an army. So it's totally mercenary. And they depended on Egypt with its huge standing army under Mubarak as the stopgap, as the last resort if they were ever threatened in terms of their rule. And when Mubarak was toppled, they just went nuts. They thought that the end was near, and maybe they were right. And they put all kinds of pressure on the United States. If you remember that hell of a week in 2011, to either stick by Mubarak or adopt another more aggressive policy in the region to make up for the fact that Mubarak and his standing army were no longer reliable to stand behind these royal schemes. That required a massive show of force. And so in my view, from the U.S. standpoint, the move against Libya was a kind of shock and awe affair to reset the relationship of forces militarily, strategically in that whole region. They weren't worried about what would happen with U.S. currency like France, and they weren't worried certainly about an overthrow of the United States government like the Saudis and the Qataris and the Arab Emirates. But they thought that the U.S., in light of their boy, Mubarak, no longer being in power, and that they needed to make their presence known in a very dramatic way, and they had France up there clamoring for it. And AFRICOM was in need of more of a mission, so why not? Gaddafi had been so villainized in the United States that there would be, they knew, virtually no domestic resistance to this.
Let me step back a sec also, because you were talking about so much here, and I really appreciate what you were saying about Gaddafi and giving some of that background. But a lot of this, it seems to me, in the more contemporary life that we have right now, was a lot of it stemmed from, and correct me if I know, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but from the Arab Spring, impacting a lot of what changed in the Middle East. Is that not correct? And if so, please explain why.
I avoided using that term Arab Spring.
All right, so what should it be? What should it be?
rather than say Arab Spring, I said the overthrow of the dictator in Tunisia.
Yes, right. Thank you.
The overthrow of Mubarak.
Okay, yes.
And that's not all that happened in those countries at that time. There were upheavals in Morocco and certainly in Bahrain. There were upheavals and in Yemen. But there was no connecting link between those two. The upheavals in Morocco were largely Islamic fundamentalists, that is coming from the right wing of society. In Bahrain, they were the Shiite majority in that country, which is ruled by a Sunni royalty. In Yemen, all kinds of long-standing problems. So I've always resisted describing what was happening in all these various countries, and I didn't mention Syria yet, as all coming under some umbrella of an Arab Spring. I don't think such a thing existed, and so I'd rather look at what actually was happening in the various countries. And in Syria, what we had was another eruption of dissent that primarily came from the right, that is, from the Islamists, the same folks who the Syrian government had been fighting, just as the Gaddafi government had been fighting for decades. And it's very difficult to equate those people with those young folks that we saw in Tahrir Square in Cairo.
But, that was one of the interesting things, though, about, I don't know if you call it the Arab Spring. Forgive me for saying that, I guess. But, this was young people taking a stand on things, and they sort of lost it after a while, I guess, under the circumstances as well, right?
Yeah, and I think we should examine it from an Egyptian, on its Egyptian merits, and stop stretching the point to make it somehow apply to what was happening in Syria. Certainly not what was happening in Libya, where they were that was just straight up jihadist uprising backed by the French and the Americans, and not what was happening in Bahrain.
Mm-hmm.
These are different countries, and different contradictions were working themselves out at about the same time. And what the Saudis were afraid of was not the same thing that the French were afraid of, and not the same thing that bothered Obama. The world is complex, but it ain't that complicated. It means that we shouldn't make it even more unintelligible by creating false connections.
Yeah, just so many challenges we face. I just want our listeners to know that you are listening to WRFG-Atlanta 89.3 FM. My name is Heather Gray, and I'm here with Cliff Albright. We're talking with Glen Ford. And he is coming to Atlanta this week on Thursday, October the 13th at 7 p.m. at First Iconium Baptist Church, which is 542 Moreland Avenue Southeast, and that's Atlanta 30316. We're looking forward to having you here, Glen. There's so much information that you can share with us about what's happening in the Middle East. It ultimately, for me, and as I'm sure it is for a lot of others, it gets so incredibly complex. But you're going to be coming here this week, and you're going to be talking about all this, and we do have some other questions of you about what's happening here in the United States. So Cliff has a question about that. Go ahead, Cliff.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about what you did not hear in the debate, and how you did not hear a candidate talking about peace, right? And there are a lot of other things that weren't talked about in that debate. So you're the executive editor of Black Agenda Report. So in terms of a Black agenda, what are some of the topics that need to be discussed in these debates that aren't getting discussed? There was no discussion of police excessive force, police brutality. So what are some of the key issues that you think, as part of a Black agenda, need to be discussed that aren't getting discussed in these debates?
Well, Democracy Now! Did a real service by offering its expanded debate. When I was on hold waiting to come on, I see that Heather, you were playing excerpts from the expanded debate, which is the only way that lots of people would know what Jill Stein, and last week, Jamu Baraka, the vice presidential candidate of the Green Party, had to say about these various issues. It's not just that you don't get a progressive viewpoint from these Republican Democratic duopoly corporate debates. It's that some things don't come up at all because they're not important to the duopoly. And the quality of the conversation that does come up when a subject is raised, like jobs, is so shallow that there is no nourishment there, nothing to feed a conversation for a country as big and rich as ours.
So before we came on the air, I was actually taking a look at your website, and I saw that you recently did something which I believe you do every year, or maybe even a couple times a year. But your CBC, your Congressional Black Caucus report card, and I went through the listing to see who was highly ranked. And well, before I go into that, let me just let you explain what is it that you do with this report card? What's the purpose and what's the process you use?
Right, and it's still up there on the website right now.
Mm-hmm.
We began doing this, I believe, in 2005, and 2006, and I think 2007. And then we discontinued because one of our key people who was keeping track of votes for us had to go off and get gainful employment, because there's no gainful employment at Black Agenda Report. But also, President Obama was coming into office, and the arrival of the first black president and all the very particular and unique contradictions that involved, that occupied our attention. So we let the Congressional Black Caucus report card lie fallow until last year. And so last year and this year we put out the report card. Well, it's the methodology that we use really only shows the relationship in terms of left to right, good, bad, and ugly within the caucus itself, because the measuring stick that we use involves votes that are taken on the floor of the House, not committee votes, and that means that issues that get papered over before the votes get to the full House can't adequately be measured. We'd have to have 5 or 10 people working for us, working the committees, to see how the caucus members, all 41 of them, that is the Democrats who have full voting rights in the House, to see how they actually operated. But you do from an analysis of the votes that they take on the full House floor, get an idea of who are the most progressive members and who are the most reactionary, backward, kissing butt of corporation members. And in Georgia, where I was half raised, you've got 2 of them. That is the brother from Columbus, Georgia, and David Scott from Atlanta. They consistently ranked at the bottom of the caucus, along with a rather newcomer, Terry Sewell from Alabama.
And when you said the brother from Columbus, you're talking about Sanford Bishop.
Sanford Bishop.
Right. And so Sanford Bishop
came out of Spencer High School 2 years before I did. Yeah.
Oh, really? So Sanford Bishop and David Scott are at the bottom, and based on your scale. Go on.
And they are also the 2 black members of the Blue Dog Democratic Coalition. That is the most right-wing caucus in the Democratic Party. That used to be a really big caucus with like 54 members until 2008 and 2010, and they got wiped out. So there are only 14 of them left, but Bishop and David Scott are among them.
So in your most recent report card, you had 10 key votes that you all looked at, and the highest scores that anybody got was 90, because basically everybody in the Black Caucus voted in favor of continued support for continued military support for Israel. And so nobody got and nobody got a perfect score out of the 10 votes, but you had a good group of people that got 90s, and John Lewis, I believe, was in that group. But then you had these other two, the Blue Dog Coalition members, David Scott and Sanford Bishop, that scored a 40. Each of them scored a 40 on your. So there were 6 of those key votes that they voted against, that they voted non-progressive, non-interest of the black community, just, basically voted along with the Republicans. And so there were a range of issues, but I thought one was really, really interesting that David Scott voted against, and that was a home ownership act, which basically, can you talk a little bit about that? Basically, it prevented, by that vote and by voting with Republicans, it blocked the ability to protect people from predatory lending in regards to home ownership. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, that's an interesting vote, because even though at the end of the process it's only David Scott who lost 10 points on that, and not the rest of the caucus members, that bill had gone through all kinds of changes during the legislative process. And when it began, Maxine Waters, who is usually a shining star of the left wing of the caucus, Maxine from Los Angeles, was the lead signer of a letter whose signatories included, I believe, 12 members of the Congressional Black Caucus, who were urging the administration to do just what that bill was designed to do, to slow down implementation of protections, new protections for homeowners and people who are thinking about buying homes from predatory lenders. And there was Maxine, who has a soft spot in her heart for black banks, leading the charge. Now, I would have preferred, if I could have figured out a way, to deduct 10 points from all 10 or 12 of them who signed that letter, but later got in line with the administration. The White House, and therefore the congressional leadership, finally came in with their whip, and they whipped everybody in line, except for David Scott, him being the recalcitrant Blue Dog. But I think by rights, by political rights, and in terms of the correct public education public education service that you want to give the people, that that it would have been nice if we had a methodology that exposed Maxine, our left progressive heroine most of the time, for being on the wrong side of the issue.
It's really,
as well as 10 or 12 of her colleagues.
Right. It's really interesting what you point out, because on many of these issues, as you said, you've got where you stand in committee, where you stand comes out of committee, but you've got all these different votes and positions that people can take, and a lot of times somebody's voting, it's the old John Kerry thing. I was for it before I was against it, right? And so, and sometimes people vote for something that they, just because they know it's not going to win, and by being able to vote for it, they can look like they took a stance, but really they were really against. There's so many different machinations and just different positions that people take, and most of us don't know what's going on. We don't keep track. We vote on election day. We don't keep track of the voting records. So what, in your mind, what does that really say about the state of our politics, the state of how we hold people accountable once they get in these positions?
Well, in terms of the way the public, we can't, of course, blame the public for not knowing that which it does not know. You can't blame folks for that. You have to blame those of us who talk about building movements and take responsibility for black folks as a whole, for not creating mechanisms that have a lot more wherewithal than Black Agenda reports to keep track of these folks. If you're not keeping track of them and you have the money, the resources to do so, and it really doesn't cost that much money, it's because you really don't want to. It's because you don't see a mission. You don't see it as your mission to hold the Congressional Black Caucus accountable in any way, shape, or form. If you did, you'd have a budget of $100,000 or $150,000 that could actually do a good job of following them around and seeing what kinds of deals they're making or inferring what deals they must have made to vote that way. It was also kind of difficult this year because every even year is in the U.S. House an election year, but during presidential election years, the congressional leadership of both parties tries very, very hard not to allow votes to come to the House floor that might wind up embarrassing some of their members during an election year, or showing any cleavages in the party. So they paper over their contradictions way before it gets to the House floor. And so finally, when you get to the end of that process, there are only a few bills that we can use for this report card, in which we can see where the differences are. And that's what's most important. That's the only thing we can really show. The differences are between the way various factions of the caucus vote. And we can get an outline of who those factions are, who are the bottom of the barrel people, who are the reliable, except when it comes to Israel, progressives, and who are those who muddle in between, trying to cut a deal where they can without looking like they are.
Before we go to another question or issue here, we're going to take a quick break. Glenn will be back in just a moment. Stay tuned. Again, my name is Heather Gray, and the program is Just Peace, and I'm here in the studio with Cliff Albright. We're talking with Glen Ford, and that was an announcement about the upcoming event with Glen here in Atlanta this Thursday at 7 p.m. Did you have some other questions, Cliff, about the Congressional Black Caucus?
Yeah, I kind of wanted to push back just a little bit on on not being able to hold the people accountable for what they don't know, because there's some stuff that's really hard to find out. Like you were saying, going to the committee meetings and doing all that. We can't ask that of them. But there are sources, like there's a Black Agenda report. Like anybody could go online. I shouldn't say anybody, but you can go to, even without internet access, you go to the library, whatever, and you can find out, well, how is my congressperson ranked, without you having to. So there's a lot of information out there, like what you provide, Glenn, where, we do kind of have some tools that we can. There are websites where you can, every time there's a vote, you can receive an email about how your congressperson voted. And I think part of what we have to do is we really have to have more discussions around what are the concrete tools and mechanisms we can use to hold these Congress people, and really any elected official. It could be mayor, it could be city council, at any level. How do we hold folks accountable?
I just want to say one thing before you respond about this, because one of the things that I've noticed is that since the Bush administration, or since the latter part of the Clinton administration, when the Republicans took over Congress, one of the things that they did, or one of the things that was encouraged, is to take civics out of classes, so that the masses of the people are not getting educated about what a democracy, how it's supposed to work. So I think we should call for civics to come back into the classrooms. In any case, go ahead, Glenn. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. All of the social sciences are being deliberately, systematically, and I think we ought to use the word strategically, because there's a strategy behind it, eliminated from public education, and this stems from the highest levels of government and the corporate world. This emphasis just on those skills that are useful to industry, but none that are useful to citizens who might have a question about what industry does.
Exactly, I completely agree. So that's another discussion that we need to have about some of the directives from the, I think particularly the Republican Party, actually, and as I will talk about the Gingrich He called it the contract with America. I call it the contract on America. Yeah, we have a lot of exploration to do along that line.
And of course, you're right in terms about the know-nothingism of the Republican Party, but you can't let the Democrats off the hook in terms of the impact on education, because charterization, which is of schools, of public schools, is primarily now a Democratic project.
Absolutely.
President Obama is the absolute world's champion, bar none, of charterization of the public schools.
Yeah, it's just a tragedy.
And that inevitably leads, again, to making a desert of the curriculum in terms of social sciences, those things we need to know to be critical thinkers.
I don't know if you've been following it, Glenn, but you're probably aware of, this vote that we're about to have here in Georgia around this, what's euphemistically called the Opportunity School District, but it's basically a state takeover of schools, of struggling schools, and it's really, it's crazy. It's the typical formula. First you defund a thing over a period of time, and then when that thing's not successful, you then try to take it over. So, but that's what we're facing, and that goes lock in step with what you were just talking about in terms of, the charter movement, which is basically privatization of education, along with all the other privatization issues we're facing with prisons and hospitals and everything else.
And we need a grassroots movement to save public education. This offensive in terms of the black community against the public schools, undermining the public schools, was a very, very sneaky one. And it took advantage of the fact that U.S. Racism created a situation in which the public schools were also vectors of discrimination and white supremacy. And so it was difficult to defend the public schools since they were also bastions of white supremacy in an institutional sense. But the corporations understood that black folks revered education as the ladder up, or at least said that they did. And that's where they invested millions and millions of dollars in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, cultivating the careers of budding politicians like Cory Booker of New Jersey, who began his career in public service as leader of a group that advocated private schools with vouchers, and then became a big advocate of charter schools because that was more applicable to the black community. So before we could even turn around and know that there was this huge corporate money push without precedent in the black community that occurred around the turn of the 21st century, they had already selected a bunch of new Negro politicians. We always, every 10 years, we get these new Negroes. So they had their crop of new black politicians like Cory Booker, like Hakeem Jeffries, congressman now out of New York, and such, and like Barack Obama, who was toying with charter schools back around that time as well. And they were in place. And we didn't even have a conversation going on in black America about defending public education, and certainly not about defending our political dialogue from the intrusion of big money. And so by 2005, we see the effects on the Congressional Black Caucus, which in previous decades had pretty much voted as a block, in that there were no more than one or at most two members at any time who could be called anything like conservative. But by 2005, the money, corporate money, had elected people like David Scott and Arthur Davis in Alabama, so that there was not only a right-wing faction of 4 or 5 of them in the Congressional Black Caucus, but when it came to a huge vote on the telecoms, that is on cable television and other digital services, reshaping the law to favor that industry. The Congressional Black Caucus voted more in favor of the corporate position than the Democratic Party as a whole. And that had never happened, where the black side of the U.S. House of Representatives was more right-wing on an important economic issue than the Democratic Party as a whole. So the entrance of money quickly created a brand new situation in conventional Democratic Party black ranks that we still have not really explored in terms of the black populace as a whole. A conversation about who the hell are these black Democrats? What does the caucus mean when it says that it's the conscience of the Congress? How materially can they show that? What is the difference between being a black mayor and being a white Democratic mayor? Does that really make a difference? Why are we fighting these color battles and losing the economic war? We're not having these internal conversations in Black America, but
and it really is a function of it really is a function of where our leadership is coming from. So it's like what you just said. Where are these folks coming from? There was a time when black folks running for Congress were coming out of the movements. They were coming out of civil rights, and so they could get there and be the conscience of the Congress. But then we've got into a point where now it's we've got the more professional, the more corporate folks that are running for these offices, and I don't know where that disconnect is, but until we get back to a point where we're able to have folks who are able to win elections because of the work that they are doing and because of the base that they've built as opposed to the funds that they have raised, we can't get back to the CBC being the conscience of the Congress. They'll just be following the leader.
Glenn, just let me just mention, we don't have much time left here. We've only got just a few minutes left. I guess we're going to need to get you back to continue with this discussion about politics and what's happening in Congress. I would appreciate if, given a lot of these problems that both you and Cliff have been making reference to, just in a few minutes, tell us, where do we go from here? What do we do? And please give us your website information as well. But what do we do? Where do we go?
Well, what we have needed most of all over the last 40 years is a renewed grassroots militant movement in the black radical tradition. That's something that we have not had since the last one petered out in the 1970s. And so it is a good time right now, in a time that I despaired of seeing again, that we have something that we can at least describe as an emergent movement developing that has captured the interest, at least, of lots and lots of our young people, and deeply enough that we see for the first time in a long time an age difference in voting and political behavior and attitudes that is measurable by generation in Black America. It was flat for the longest time, and things are flat in terms of political differentials between generations when there's nothing going on politically, when when the political scene is inert and nothing's stirring. So you won't see much difference between the younger folks and the older folks. But now we're seeing those kinds of differences, which is additional proof that there is the beginnings of a movement, and that's where the change will come from old institutions like the Congressional Black Caucus. They need to be reformed, revamped.
Right. Give us your website, please.
That's blackagendareport.com.
All right. Glenn, I want to thank you so much. Time has gone so quickly. You have so much to say, full of all kinds of breadth and details. All right. So, Cliff, that was interesting.
Yeah, definitely. We started off with the international issues and issues of war and circled back around to the domestic issues.
Went to the domestic, right.
Mm-hmm. And there's obviously a connection between those those two.
Absolutely. So I'm going to ask everyone to stay tuned for Sobukwe and Revolutionary African Perspectives, and we'll be back next week. Stay tuned.